O IESB está crescendo, o IESB está se transformando, ganhando nota 4 no MEC, crescendo e se transformando, construindo um novo campus e criando um novo currículo em que a prática será ainda mais presente, crescendo e se transformando. Venha fazer parte de tudo isso, crescendo e transformando também.
There's two parts to ShoreBank. There's about a 37-year history of ShoreBank, which was founded in Chicago. During the early 70s, banks redlined particular parts of a geography, places they didn't want to make loans. And so the black communities of Chicago were redlined out, and no bank would lend to people in that community. And so some folks bought a bank in South Shore, Chicago, and started lending to the blacks that were moving into the community. And as a result of that, that community is a really stable community today. And you go beyond that, you go literally a block away, and the buildings are bulldozed, burned out buildings. And they sort of proved the case that you can lend to anybody, they will repay loans. It's a good strategy. And it was a mechanism for breaking down racial discrimination in the early 70s. So that was sort of ShoreBank, and that bank still exists and operates in Chicago. And then they were attracted to the Northwest by EcoTrust to start ShoreBank Pacific and focus on, the initial idea was to focus on environmental integrity out here in the West. And their idea was to take that concept and move that into the rest of their institutions.
We started a bank because there's a lot of leverage in a bank. We raised $10 million, $2.5 million for the loan fund and early development costs of the nonprofit. That's $10 million investment over 15 years has resulted in ShoreBank, not only the bank here and the nonprofit here, but the parent corporation in Chicago. They adopted the triple bottom line too, so now they care about environmental conditions as well as social and economic conditions. And they've now made over $1 billion in loans. So we turned 10 million into $1 billion in loans for businesses trying to improve social, environmental, and economic well-being in their respective communities. So, it's an idea with a relatively modest effort here in the Pacific Northwest. We access new sources of capital. We help create a permanent development institution which is self-funded and grows over time by making money, by increasing deposits, by increasing their capital base, increasing their lending, and having more and more impact on larger and larger businesses. So it's really about leverage. It's about leverage, and it's about increasing access to a wide array of resources to do the work of conservation.
The focus of the bank is building sustainable communities. And so we asked ourselves, what does that mean? And that's sort of a non-trivial question, because you really have to look at all of the things that build a community. And it's the elements that build the community itself. It's things like parks, it's education, it's hospitals, it's things like that you need to have in a community to make a stable community. It's also having strong businesses. So our focus is in what businesses can we bring into that community that will be there for a long time. So that's sort of one set. And the second set is, what is the business like? What's its focus on using local businesses rather than shipping its product across the country to get manufactured? How does that business interact with the other businesses in the community? How does the business run itself? And so we've got a whole series of questions around businesses. And then there's a third set, which is, how do they interact with the environment? And how does their product, how does their techniques for running their business, how does all of that affect the environment and establish a footprint, their environmental footprint, and how can they minimize that? And so we developed a whole range of questions in those areas that we go out and we assess the business and we say, okay, where do you fit against sort of perfection? Where do you guys fit in that arena? And so when we talk about mission score, that's what we're talking about, is the score we give them after we do that assessment. And then we go back annually, and after we score them, we say, here are some areas that you can improve on. And we go back the following year and say, okay, how did you do? Are you improving in those areas, and can we advance you in becoming more sustainable? That's sort of our whole mission scoring system. We lend to anybody who's willing to talk to us about that. So we can have folks who have low scores, we have folks with high scores. Both of them can become borrowers of ours, but they better jolly well talk to us about how they can improve. And if they don't, if they're really not interested in improving in that area, we tell them to go to some other bank. But it's about 42 pages of questions that we go through with a business. And so you go through each of those elements and score them, and then you get the aggregate score out of that.
In the United States, most of the grocery stores are now owned by large international companies. And so it's very important for there to be small local grocers who will continue to do business with small local growers. We opened our first store in 2000, and we've opened 8 since then, so we have 9 stores. It's been about 10 years, but the whole idea of what we've been doing hasn't really changed. It's been the same since the very beginning. We work with ShoreBank for stores number 3 and stores number 4. And that was because store number 4, which opened about the same time as store number 3, was in a lower income, more ethnically mixed neighborhood. And we couldn't find any banks to lend us the money to open that store. They didn't think that a store like ours would do well in a neighborhood where it wasn't all middle-class white people. And so we had a lot of trouble borrowing the money, and we went to ShoreBank at that point, and they were the only bank that was willing to step up and help us. Well, it was critical. We actually were building these stores, and there was steel going up, and we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every month, and we didn't have any money. So getting the money from ShoreBank was essential to the success of our company. ShoreBank has a different way of doing business than other banks. ShoreBank adds another layer of requirements if you're going to do business with them. If you want to do business with ShoreBank, your business model has to be a sustainable business model, and ShoreBank won't do business with you unless it is. And so it's very complicated because they have to pick the right people to lend money to, and they have to make money. If they're not profitable, they won't be able to stay around. So it's more difficult for them to do what they're doing, but they've been around for a long time now, and they're quite successful. So I think they've figured it out.
So the money comes after the rethinking of the community. So as you think about, what can I do in Argentina, what can I do in Chile, what can I do in Peru, it's going to be about how do I rebuild that rural community? Or your question of the city, how do I rebuild parts of the city so that it becomes vibrant? And it's really rethinking, sitting down in the village and saying, what is it about this village that makes it crucial to exist? Why is it here, and how can I rethink it? That kind of thinking really is instructive to how do you then how do you build South America around all of the communities rather than doing what China is doing. Everybody's moving into the city. Well, long run, that isn't going to work. So it's really how do you rebuild the rural communities and make them work so that people don't have to move into the city. And every day we think of ourselves that way, that it really is about integrity. It's about doing things that make a difference in the community. I mean, that, at the end of the day, when you go home, you say, did I do anything right? You're really saying, did we make a difference in this community? And if we do, that's the reason we get up in the morning.